What's up, everyone? Hello. Today we are doing causes of World War One, all recovered from COVID. Feeling so wonderful. This is more what my personality will be like. I was like so out of it in most of the other videos I did. So we're getting into kind of like the European side of what World War One looks like. I hope that a lot of you have a ton of background information on this from your world history classes, and that this day is pretty much just review refreshers. And let's get into it. But on this day, you guys have a midpoint quiz. You're gonna have to study for that quiz right when you come in. Then we'll start up that quiz as soon as the bell rings, and then we'll be able to get into the wonders of World War One through these slides. I am debating if I should give you guys guided notes. So if you're watching this ahead of time, let me know what your thoughts are on guided notes, because obviously they take super long time to create, and a lot of the other American history teachers don't give them. Let me know what your teacher did before I started with you guys, and if you'd like me to continue whatever that policy was, or if you're interested in changing it up. Argument for guided notes obviously is that it helps keep you guys on track, paying attention, making sure you're following along, and you have something to reference when you're studying, when you are engaging with the material, when you're trying to look for future answers to warm-ups, exit tickets, questions in class. However, the argument against giving guided notes is that it allows for a really passive understanding of the material, allows you to jot down a word here or there and not really engage with what is most important for me to write down on this slide. And of course, if you decide to pursue college, you will not receive any guided notes, obviously. So the idea of this being a school that will really prepare you for a choice-filled future, that choice might include college, and we want to make sure that we are preparing you for that. Of course, you wouldn't receive guided notes if you were to pursue college. Therefore, I'm still debating it because I want to help you be successful, and I'm debating what that might look like. Let me know your thoughts. We are going to do a DBQ on World War One. It's kind of a short one. It's about the United States getting involved. It's about the Zimmerman telegram. It's pretty interesting. And then we'll do some ACT prep up time, because you guys have the ACT on Wednesday, March 8th. It's going to be a half day. And I'm in charge of helping you with your reading. So we will work on that. And then we will do your exit ticket, which of course are what were the causes that led to World War One. So make sure you are engaged, paying attention to any causes. That's going to be the most important thing for you to capture down today. Here's some general background information on World War One. Started on July 28th of 1914 and ended on November 11th of 1918. We're going to have an entire day on the Treaty of Versailles. And we have this lesson, one more lesson, and then Treaty of Versailles lesson. This treaty was signed on June 28th of 1919. It's the treaty that officially ended the war, negotiated what the end of the war would look like, what kind of consequences might get involved. 30 countries were involved in World War One. That's why it's called a world war. So many people involved, so many countries involved. Almost 8 million people died. Around 22 million people were wounded. All right, if you are in class with me, I want to know, what do you already know about World War One? If you are at home watching this video because you were absent, make a middle mental note, jot it down on your piece of paper, think to yourself, what do I already know about this? What's my comfort level? Am I ground zero? I haven't really learned about this before. Maybe medium, like maybe once I get this information, I'll remember a little bit more, but not a ton coming to mind right now. Or are you a World War One history buff? You love World War One. You want to get involved with World War One, like learning more deeply. You already understand the basics. Where are you? And how can we help you to grow on that? Today I'm going to start with mostly background information for you. I'm just going to check my settings real quick, make sure everything is going well. Looks like it. All right. Just want to make sure you're seeing my screen, everything's going well before I jump in here to the causes of World War One. This is the abbreviation that you should remember. I'm going to be honest with you, there are not like a ton of questions about the European side of World War I, which is what we're talking about today. But this is super essential background information for you to have in order to understand where the United States is really coming from in entering this conflict. And of course, this side is super, super important. But of course, this is an American history class. So we're going to be looking at it through the lens of the United States, looking onward at this conflict as they read their newspapers, as maybe the politicians are having some conferences with these people involved, making some decisions about how involved to get. This is the information that they'll have going into tomorrow's lesson, which is United States entry and involvement in World War I. So sometimes we include this assassination as one of the causes and sometimes not. So you might have heard mania or Maine. I want you guys to remember mania. Let's include the assassination. So we've got militarism, building up the army, the navy, new weapons. So we're ready for a war with all this technology that we have. Alliance. We've got the Triple Entente, which involves England, France, and Russia as the main powers, and the Triple Alliance with Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and Italy. Nationalism, pride in one's country that creates a divide. I'm sorry, I read it too quickly. A drive to create countries that represent certain ethnic groups, certain religions. For example, we've got a lot of nationalism in Greece and Serbia. So extreme pride in one's country, willingness to sacrifice your life for that country. Sorry, I suddenly got hurt. Okay, resume. Imperialism is something that was the first day of the unit, and we've talked about it ever since with the Spanish-American War, and then again with imperialism in Latin America and Asia. But it not only was affecting the United States, but also European countries and Japan taking over other countries for economic or other reasons. And the thing that really triggered the beginning of the fighting was the assassination and the death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was killed on June 28th of 1914. As kind of a recap of the last slide, I want you guys to choose one of these causes of World War I and explain how this was a cause. So we just went over it, but I want you to pick the one you're most familiar with, take a minute to think about it, rephrase how it's a cause in your own words, what that word means, and how it caused World War I. And then we'll explain it to someone else. Can't really do this through Zoom or through this recorded YouTube video, more like. So do it on your own paper, on your own time. All right, a little bit more details about militarism. World War I was the first war in which advanced weaponry and tactics were used. There was a race for creating more weapons of mass destruction among nations, which would continue for quite a while after this event. There was a desire to create a large amount of weapons, as well as building up a nation's army and navy. Germany and England were the top two countries working on this race for mass destruction weapons. This was also kind of the beginning of this thing called the military-industrial complex. Have you guys heard of that before? So this is the idea that the government invests a lot in military weapons, and these, like the production of these weapons, really advance the economy by creating many jobs for the people working in manufacturing, jobs for people working in development of new weaponry, and therefore the economy is extremely reliant on the government funding these efforts to create more weapons, to design more weapons, and a reliance on the military. Military spending increased from 1890 to 1913. So we see, for example, in Britain, an 117% increase between that 23-year period. We don't see the US on this one. We'll check them out next time, but we also see spending increases most extremely in Austria-Hungary and in Germany and moderate increases, or France isn't really moderate, 92% increase in France. I'd say Russia like 19%. That's probably more like if you got a war going on, you're definitely going to be spending more on the military efforts. 19% increase there. All right, let's check out this video on military alliances.
Nationalism flourished across Europe. Many countries were building their global empires. Great Britain and Germany were colonizing Africa and the Middle East in a frenzy of imperialism. France and Germany were now rivals at home and abroad as they clashed over control of Morocco. Russia turned its attention to Europe as he sought control over the Serbs. The contest for international trade, resources, and land soon resulted in a buildup of military strength. The British, Germans, French, Italians, Japanese, and Americans began an arms race, stockpiling weapons, recruiting armies, and launching battleships to protect their interests at home and abroad. As each country amassed countless weapons and beefed up their army and navies, they saw the wisdom of agreeing to military alliances, mutual treaties of assistance that would commit each nation to support one another should they be attacked. By 1914, there were two major defense alliances. The Triple Entente, later called the Allies, consisted of France, Great Britain, and Russia, although Russia had a separate treaty with Serbia. The other, the Triple Alliance, later called the Central Powers, included Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Italy. Italy would later join the Allies. For a little while, these military alliances served as a type of checks and balances system, with each nation reluctant to upset the balance of power. But despite these alliances, war soon erupted. A single event would soon tip the scale.
All right, let's see what other factors we have. One of those is alliances. To protect itself from French revenge, Germany formed alliances with Italy and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This is called the Triple Alliance. You do need to know what countries are in what alliance, the three main ones of each anyways. Russia and Great Britain, also known as England, became concerned about Germany's new power through these alliances, and they formed another alliance with France. This one was called the Triple Entente. This little simulation is like real quick, but I can't really explain it over the video because it requires you guys to like move around a little bit. It's real easy, but I'm going to skip this. You guys, okay, so essentially what the simulation will communicate is that when you have alliances, it pulls everybody into the war. Like, not just the two people who are mad at each other, but their alliances. And then the alliances. Like, it blows things up so quickly. The Triple Alliance of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy was counterbalanced by the Triple Entente of France, Russia, and Great Britain. As a result, by 1907, Europe was divided into two armed and rather fearful camps. Make a prediction. Which side do you think the US is going to join? I'll give you the answer. Triple Entente. So this is a little map for you guys. This is Europe here. So we've got these pink countries, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy in the Triple Alliance. And the blue countries, France, UK, and Russia in the Triple Entente. Now notice here you see Russian allies labeled, such as Syria. So that's an example of how like the allies will get pulled in. Because remember, we mentioned there were 30 countries involved in World War I. Not just these 6, not 7 with the US, but a ton of countries. I need to plug in my computer. I'll keep talking. I'll plug it in. All right, these are the flags of each country, just demonstrating what we've got going on here, some different alliances. And of course, the Balkan countries get pulled in eventually as well. So we've got treaties uniting these countries, we've got alliances uniting them, we have previous conflicts that are resolved, and people formed agreements over uniting these countries. And of course, pulling a ton of people into the conflicts. All right. After each of these, I'm just having you guys basically reflect and re-summarize to me what we just talked about, just so that I make sure that you understand these concepts, because war can be complicated. It can be a confusing concept to some people. So alliances contributed to World War I by making it a world war, by making it, instead of several countries upset at each other, 30 countries involved. Here is another map so that you can picture Europe. Has anybody been to Europe before? Just curious. If you were in person, I would ask you. In 1882, Austria, Hungary, Germany, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance. They promised to defend each other if either were attacked. So this is what a map of Europe would have looked like until 1914. Less countries than we know today, because we'll see with the Treaty of Versailles, new countries were created. And in 1907, France, Russia, and Britain formed the Triple Entente. They did not promise to help each other, but together they encircled Germany and Austria-Hungary. Let's check out how 5 major treaties and alliances built up to
the First World War is often interpreted as fought between 2 major alliances, the Triple Entente between France, Britain, and Russia, and the Dual Alliance linking Germany and Austria-Hungary. But this oversimplifies the alliances, treaties, and agreements that developed throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries and drew the great powers, along with numerous other countries, into war. Between 1887 and 1914, Europe was transformed from a system in which well-balanced forces maintained a delicate equilibrium to one polarized by 2 hostile alliance networks. In 1887, it was inconceivable that a crisis in Austro-Serbian relations could have led to a continental war, but by 1914, that was exactly what happened. The Treaty of London, created in 1839, guaranteed the sovereignty of Belgium, which had broken away from the United Kingdom of the Netherlands in 1830. Its signatories were Great Britain, Austria, France, the German Confederation, Russia, and the Netherlands. A guarantee of Belgium's neutrality was also brokered by Britain. While Germany later disregarded the treaty, Britain went to war with the claim that they were upholding Belgium's neutrality. 40 years later, on October 7th, 1879, the dual alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary was signed in Vienna. Each pledged the other support in the event one was invaded by Russia, and guaranteed neutrality should one be invaded by another major European power. Italy joined to form the Triple Alliance in 1882, but reneged on its commitment once war broke out in 1914. Germany also signed the Reinsurance Treaty with Russia in June 1887. Tensions between Russia and Austria-Hungary over competing interests in the Balkans compelled Germany's Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, to move to prevent Russia forming an alliance with France. This secret treaty guaranteed that each country would remain neutral should the other be attacked by a third power, unless Russia were to attack Austria-Hungary or Germany to attack France. Berlin also promised to support Russian objectives in the Turkish Straits. The treaty expired in 1890, when Bismarck's successor, Leo von Caprivi, feared it would provoke the Ottoman and British empires. The Triple Alliance and the failure to renew a treaty with Germany had left Russia vulnerable, while France had been isolated in Europe since its defeat in the 1870 to 1871 Franco-Prussian War. France began to invest in Russian infrastructure from 1888, and the two formed the Franco-Russian Alliance on January 4, 1894. It was to remain in place for as long as the Triple Alliance existed, and stipulated that if one of the countries of the Triple Alliance attacked France or Russia, its ally would attack the aggressor in question, and that if a Triple Alliance country mobilized its army, France and Russia would mobilize. The next major agreement in Europe came about with the Entente Cordiale in April 1904. Having been involved in 3 rounds of talks with Germany between 1898 and 1901, Britain decided not to join the Triple Alliance. When the Russo-Japanese War was about to erupt, France and Britain found themselves being dragged into the conflict on the side of their respective allies. France was allied with Russia, while Britain had recently signed the Anglo-Japanese alliance. In order to avoid war, the sides negotiated a treaty that settled many long-standing issues, particularly their differences in Africa over British control of Egypt and French control of Morocco. The agreement marked the end of nearly 1,000 years of intermittent conflict between the two countries. The final substantial agreement came in 1907 with the so-called Triple Entente between Britain, France, and Russia, thereby firming their stance against the Triple Alliance. But in reality, there was no Triple Entente. The 1907 treaty was specifically between Britain and Russia to stop their rivalry in Central Asia. After Russia's defeat to Japan in 1905, it seemed that Russia no longer posed a threat to Britain's Indian interests, and there was no three-way agreement as there was with the Triple Alliance. Even after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, the July crisis, neither of Britain's agreements with France or Russia guaranteed that she would ally with the countries in the event of a European war. However, when Germany executed the Schlieffen Plan on August 3, 1914, and crossed the Belgian border, thus violating the Treaty of London, Britain declared war on Germany.
All right, that tells you
the First World War is often
that tells you a little bit more about how alliances contributed to World War I. Next, we have nationalism. Have you guys heard this word before? Nationalism. What do you think that might mean? We went over it on the first slide, so you got a little bit of background. The French Revolution has spread nationalism throughout most of Europe. Nationalism is the idea that people with the same origins, language, political ideals had the right to form sovereign states through the process of self-determination. So they wanted everybody to embrace that particular country's history, culture, and sometimes would be discriminatory against minority groups or people who may have immigrated to that country. This was really strong in the Balkan area. The Ottoman Empire had ruled the Balkan area for about 400 years. The Balkans were Albanians, Greeks, Romans, and Slav. Each group was struggling for their own independence. Bosnia was also part of this and was an area of extreme hostility. So that's like violence, unrest. Austria-Hungary annexed Bosnia as one of its territories in 1908. And Serbia was newly independent and thought that Bosnia should be one of their territories. So this became an area of conflict. This is an area that you might not have learned about before in your previous studies of World War I. But the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a huge contributor of how World War I began. Austria-Hungary was trying to expand their influence across many surrounding nations. Here you see how the influence in those countries started to change because the ethnic groups, the ethnic makeup of the territory was so diverse. So you've got Germans, Hungarians, Czechoslovakians, or just Czechs and Slovaks, because that was not a combined country yet at the time. Polish people, Ukrainians, Romanians, Italians, all throughout the country. So we got a lot of diverse influence there. I want to hear about what y'all's experiences was like in Europe, if any of you have been there. What kind of diversity did you see within the cultures, and what kind of influences from the past might you have seen? Did you see any historical landmarks from this time period, for example? I unfortunately have never been to Europe. Maybe one day, but we'll see. We'll see. In between 1864 and 1871, the German Kingdom of Prussia had united the various German states. The newly unified Germany industrialized quickly. What does it mean to industrialize? Become like focused on manufacturing and factories, things like that, and it helped them to become a world power. While unifying Germany, Prussia had attacked France and defeated them, forcing them to give up territory along the German border in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870 and 1871. Through this experience, France and Germany became enemies. we'll talk a little bit more here about some nationalism in Europe.
It was called by some the war to end all wars. Socialists dubbed it the Imperialist War. Soldiers often called it the Trench War. World War I was, in fact, the first modern war, a war waged with the ingenuity of the industrial age, from telegraphs to tanks, movies to machine guns. Despite being a modern war, the roots of World War I were steeped in Europe's tumultuous past. As far back as 1870, France and Germany were enemies. When Germany won the Franco-Prussian War, it seized two French provinces, Alsace and Lorraine. From then on, a competitiveness for European leadership evolved between the two countries, and a spirit of nationalism gripped them both. This nationalism went far beyond simply maintaining patriotic feelings for one's country. Instead, Germany, France, and other European countries believed that the interests of their homeland should always be put ahead of world cooperation. The resulting contempt for one country by another inevitably led to the risk of war. Nationalism was at the root of conflicts between Russia and Austria-Hungary. Russians believed that they were the protector of all of Europe's Slavic people, regardless of which government they happened to live under. For example, Serbia was an independent country, but millions of other Serbs lived under Austria-Hungary's rule. The result was an intense rivalry between Russia and...
I'm not sure if I skipped the last few seconds there when he cut off, but we will go ahead and move on. He talks about his main points of what nationalism is. Another cause that we mentioned is imperialism. Virtually all the major powers were engaged in a scramble for empire to bolster their economies. We've talked about the United States' influence in imperialism in Alaska, Hawaii, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, for example. The fiercest competition, though, was between Britain, Germany, and between France and Germany. So they were competing for similar regions. Tell me a little bit about what you remember from the past 3 days about how the United States got involved in imperialism. Think about that. I just listed the regions. So if you don't remember, go back to your notes from the previous 3 days to give some more details. Great Britain, Germany, and France needed foreign markets after their increase in manufacturing caused by the Industrial Revolution. These countries competed for economic expansion in Africa. How might this negatively impact Africa? Think about it. Just like we see some negative impacts of imperialism in the regions where the United States was getting involved, we might also see some negative impacts on Africa, where these people's culture might be diminished, taken away, misconstrued, and those people might be punished for practicing their original cultures. There was a clash of France against Germany and Britain in northern Africa, and in the Middle East, the crumbling Ottoman Empire was alluring to Austria-Hungary, the Balkans, and Russia. I want you to, again, think about how the U.S. engaged in imperialism in Native American territory, Mexican-American War, Alaska, Hawaii, and the Spanish-American War. Pick one of these to expand a little bit on. Tell me a little bit more. If you don't remember one of them, make sure you go back and review that content. How might this time period continue to impact Africa today? Look how the regions are divided up between European countries. Think about what are some ways that this might, even still 100 years later, be impacting Africa. For example, in many of these regions, the main languages spoken are no longer the native tribal languages, but the European language in which that country had control. For example, many of these purple regions prioritized speaking French as their national language, and that goes back to how the French colonized those regions. It's just one example of many that you could discuss. The death of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was another cause of World War I. He was the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne and was assassinated while touring through Serbia by Gavrilo Princip, a member of an organization called Black Hand, who wanted independence for the region from Austria-Hungary. This led to the war as countries rushed to avenge the murder and fulfill their alliance obligations. Where's my next slide button? There it is. Here are some photos or some interpretations of what it may have looked like when he was assassinated. It's a very famous moment in history. Here's a video about his assassination.
A single event would soon tip the scale. On June 28, 1914, in the capital of Bosnia, a village called Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife Sophie were waving to the happy crowds from their motorcade, when a young man leapt from the sidewalk and shot them both dead. The assassin turned out to be a member of a secret society called the Black Hand, whose goal was to reunite all Serbs under one rule. The assassination was used by the Austria-Hungary government as an opportunity to make an example of Serbia and squelch any nationalist uprisings in the future. 1 month later, Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia. If it weren't for the military alliances, it might have been a relatively small, localized conflict. Instead, one nation after another was pulled into the fight due to their treaties of support. In order to aid its Serbian allies, Russia mobilized its armed forces. Germany, who was obligated by treaty to support Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia 2 days after that. Subsequently, Germany declared war on Russia's ally, France. And 1 day later, Great Britain, who had a treaty with France, declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. World War I had begun.
All right. So this, of course, caused a domino effect. Franz Ferdinand's assassination caused a domino effect. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for Ferdinand's death and declared war on Serbia. They gave them a month to apologize, and when they didn't, declared war over it. This led to Germany pledging support for Austria-Hungary and Russia pledging support for Serbia. So we will pick up on how the United States joined World War I tomorrow. But there's kind of an introduction to that with this thing called the Zimmerman telegrams. Let's see here. I'll show you the worksheet. World War I. So you don't have any background knowledge on the Zimmerman telegram. I want you to go in here and do your best with this worksheet, with this reading. What happened? Some of them we'll learn about tomorrow, okay? Or next time. So you might not know all of these yet. You might have to look some things up, but I want you to get some background knowledge about how the United States joined World War I. So you'll read this primary source. This is the primary source, the Zimmerman telegram, that convinced the United States to join World War I. So what is this document? Who wrote it? Who's the intended audience? Why might the intended audience be important to note? Who intercepted it, decoded it, and shared it with the United States? Why would they share it with the United States? Why is contextual important? Why is the contextual information of like who intercepted it important to note? And what does this Zimmerman telegram say? Then you'll write this paragraph down here, essentially combining those analysis questions into a wider analysis. What does the telegram say? What impact might this telegram have had on the American public and President Wilson's decision to eventually enter the war? When the Zimmerman telegram was published in 1917, Many Americans doubted its authenticity. That means like whether or not it was real. Why do you think some Americans doubted if it was real and called it fake news? And which details about the sourcing and context of this document might have been troubling or confusing to Americans in 1917? So this is what you'll be looking at, and we'll go over it in some more detail the next day. However, you guys might have a little bit of time afterwards, and unfortunately, we're going to do some ACT prep with that time. The tentative date of the exam, this is the slide set from last year. So the actual date, it's not even a tentative date, is March 8th, not March 1st. On testing day, I want you to breathe. Do exactly what the directions tell you. Have a good attitude. Stay positive. Remember, this is an experience meant for you. Focus. Be like shark. Keep moving. And think. You're going to answer every question, seek the best answers, and do what your brain does best. You guys are so smart. All right, during the reading test, you're going to read 4 passages. They'll each have 40 multiple choice questions. You're going to do them in 35 minutes each. That's going to be about 8.5 minutes per passage. The ACT reading test assesses a student's ability to read and understand the lines and read and understand between the lines. If you are interested in pursuing college, this test is going to be super important. But it's important anyways. That's a great learning experience, and you might decide that you want to use these test results for something at a later date, even if you don't think college is in your future right now. Each reading passage represents a different type of text, and they are always in this order: prose or fiction. This is going to be a novel or a short story excerpt. Social science, an informative piece from anthropology, business, economics, history, political science, psychology, or sociology. Humanities, a personal or informative piece from the arts, literature, music, or philosophy. And natural science, an informative piece from biology, chemistry, geology, medicine, physics, technology, or zoology. This tends to be the most technical. Here are some general tips and strategies. Answer the easy questions first. Don't waste time on questions that are too difficult. Questions are not presented in the order of difficulty. Skip difficult questions and come back later. Circle these in test booklet. Refer back to the passage as needed, and process of elimination is key. Narrowing down answer choices before taking, I think I accidentally skipped one. Before taking an educated guess improves your chances of getting the answer correct. You are going to want to determine the main ideas, locate and interpret important details, understand sequences of events, make comparisons, determine cause and effect relationships, make generalizations and conclusions, analyze the passage's mood or tone, and pay attention to names, dates, titles, theories, and italicized terms. The step 1 is the first read. I'm going to start with a quick read of the passage, take 3 minutes or less, and look for some specific things. You're going to skim and make sure that you can answer these questions. Who are the main characters? How do they relate to one another? What seems to be the problem, and what is the potential solution? For the other passages, the questions you'll be looking for is, what is the main point being made, or the thesis? What are 2 or 3 major sections or arguments? Read the topic sentences and the last paragraph to confirm your initial impressions. On any passage, read the blurb that identifies the author title and may give additional information. Look for words that identify a right there question, according to the passage, states, indicates, offers. Know which questions are reasoning, infers, means, suggests, or implies. Step 2, the questions. Do these first. These are now questions. If you can answer the question confidently without looking back, answer it. If you know you can find the answer quickly because you know generally where to look, verify an answer. If the question has a specific line or reference, find it and answer. Do these next. These are later questions. The question has an accept or not. If you don't know where to look or you think it will take a significant amount of time. You're going to stick to the time limit. By the 8-minute mark, circle all answers in the book. Transfer them to the answer sheet. Make a guess on the ones you do not know, but circle them in case you have time to go back. You need to be done with each passage in 8 minutes and 45 seconds. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to change that little typo for them. All right, let's take a look at this video. What if the passage is boring? What if it can't hold your attention for even 8.5 minutes?
One of the big challenges of SAT and ACT reading is that the passages are just so boring. I mean, occasionally you'll get something marginally interesting, but on average, the passages are somewhere between reading the phone book and copying out the dictionary in terms of how interesting they are. And this is a challenge, right? Because if you're not interested in what you're reading, it's hard to really stay focused. It's hard to find the information you need. It's hard to get the main idea. Basically, everything is harder. And when you're doing a bunch of sections in a row, you're doing a bunch of passages in a row and a bunch of work, you got to keep up that focus. You got to keep up that interest somehow. So sometimes you'll hear advice like, oh, okay, when you have a boring passage, just pretend that you're interested in it, right? Pretend to really want to know what's going on. And maybe on some level that works. And I think even perhaps the most boring passages, in fact, can have some interesting aspects to them. But that's not the advice I want to give you. Here's the advice I want to give you for how to crush those boring reading passages. Because in the end, all we care about is not that you're interested in it or that you learn something from it. All we care about for the SAT or for the ACT is that you get all the questions right. So what do we do in order to achieve that goal? What we see here is an SAT passage. This also applies to the ACT or any test that you are going to be asked questions about a reading passage. And here's the thing. This is what you do. Don't focus on trying to be interested in the passage. It's an uphill battle. It's probably not going to happen. Instead, what you want to be interested in is finding answers to questions, right? They give you questions. Here we see 2 of the questions from this particular section. They give you questions that you have to answer. So what you should be interested in is finding the answers to the questions. Make it like a game, a mission, your goal to say, okay, for number 14, I need to find in lines 1 to 23 the answer to this question about what the author suggests about both sides of the debate. That's my goal. That's what's going to get me focused. Because when you focus on questions, when you focus on something you're looking for, you are giving yourself something to do. It's more active and you have a mission. You've got a goal. Compare that to, say, what a lot of people do, which is try to read the passage through and try to be interested in the passage overall and try to care about what the author is saying about this or that. It's not going to happen. Instead, the general rule of thumb, whether you're looking at the SAT or to a large extent the ACT, is only do your reading when you're looking for something. So for the SAT, you're only going to read the passage when you're looking for the answer to a specific question. You're never going to read the passage just to read it. You're always looking for something. What is my target? What is my goal? What is that fact? Because that makes it a bit more interesting. It makes it more of a game. It makes it more of an actual task that you can do. For the ACT, you do want to read the passage through first before you go to the questions. But there you're also reading for 2 things. You're reading for the main idea and you're reading for the structure, how the passage is put together, what happens in which parts of it. So even when you're reading it through for the ACT, you are still looking for something. You have a mission. So, and then when you get to the questions, of course, you're going to be rereading the passage to find answers to questions. So don't focus on trying to make a boring passage interesting. A lot of times it's not going to happen. Instead, focus on making the questions interesting. Focus on your task, which is to answer questions, to search through that passage and find those clues, find those little tidbits, those pieces of information, sometimes even that single word that might lead you to your answer. That is your mission. That's what should interest you. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.
All right, so that was a tip on how to make sure that you are engaged. Now, here's some traps you might see. Deceptive language. The answer might sound true or be related to the passage, but it doesn't answer the question. You might see some extreme words like best, never, must, most, worst, totally, always, only, cannot. When you see these words, eliminate that answer. That's true for my test too. Just heads up most of the time. True statements that are not supported by the passage. Be alert. The ACT loves to trick you. Half right or half wrong answers. Read the entire answer. The ACT is testing you to make sure that you read the entire answer choice before selecting your answer. All right, here's an example of a fiction story. If you were to look at this, you would first read the first column to identify the setting, the characters, the problem, and read the second column to identify the attempted solutions. Don't expect a full solution in this short passage alone. For a nonfiction strategy, underline the title and author for clues to the topic. Closely read first for the author's thesis. What does he or she want you to know, think, or believe? Closely read and identify or verify the thesis. The reader should know the author's main point. So these are some examples. I'm not having you read this right this second. Another thing you might do is read the first sentence of others. Mark keywords, skim the rest, looking for important info. As you take apart these questions, look at the lead words in the questions to zone in on the topic and the type of question. Make sure that you mark the text, underline, or annotate. Expect the text to be uninteresting. Make yourself think and read. After all, it's only 35 minutes. When answering questions, only go back and reread the passage when a line number appears in the item. Trust your impressions of the text and pace yourself. Work smarter, not harder. A shorter answer is usually better than a longer answer. Remember to use PO, process of elimination, to improve your chances of getting answers correct. Answer all questions. There's no penalty for incorrect answers. Look for a theme among the correct answers. Correct answers should all agree with each other. Make sure to read the short description at the top and make sure to note the 5-minute warning. Remember the format. 4 passages, 40 multiple choice questions in 35 minutes. This is going to be 8.5 minutes per passage. All right, very good job hanging in there today. And that was a super long one, super long for me too. Proud of all of you. Oh no, I just need to do the exit ticket, which is what were the causes of World War I? So of course, you're going to go back up to the mania slide. This is what you should capture. Make sure you understand all of them. All right, see y'all next time for U.S. entry into World War I.